Welcome to Study Session 9, Crisis Intervention, Introduction. A special kind of interview and interviewing process which is really intensified helping is crisis intervention. Sometimes crisis intervention is a version of one-stop helping. Other times, several helping interviews will take place while the crisis is being resolved. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this study session, you should be able to discuss crisis intervention. Concept of crisis intervention. Life isn't always tranquil for any of us. We all have faced crises in our lives and certainly will again. What amounts to a crisis for a person is really a very individual thing. A situation or event that will not particularly alarm or upset one individual may cause tremendous distress and be a crisis for someone else. Whether or not something amounts to a crisis for a person depends on his unique combination of tolerance for stress and coping capacities. When a crisis does occur, it invariably tips the balance for a person from a state of reasonable comfort to a time of turbulence, strain, and anxiety. A crisis may be caused by a specific external force or event, such as loss of someone or something important in a person's life, or some catastrophe, such as a fire or hurricane. Or crisis may result from a series of stresses that have accumulated over a long period of time. The straw that broke the camel's back is this latter type of crisis precipitant. However, the crisis was caused, the impact on the individual faced with it is the same. A time of problems and anxiety. A crisis poses a problem that, by definition, is without immediate solution. That's why it's a crisis. The person's problem-solving resources are overwhelmed and overtaxed. The person does not have the problem-solving skills at his disposal. If he did, he would mobilize them to deal with the problem effectively before it reached crisis proportions. A crisis is a threat. When crisis enters a person's life, he usually perceives it as a threat to his value system and his paramount life goals. For example, loss of a job may threaten a person's lifestyle. A mother's serious illness may threaten the solution of a family. A crisis is far more than a nuisance or inconvenience in a person's life. It is a frightening and threatening experience. Because the crisis holds some serious threat of disrupting a person's life, it is understandable that the crisis situation generates an enormous amount of tension in him. During a crisis, emotions are running very high. Usually, during the course of the crisis, however, the tension will reach its most intolerable peak and then fall off to a more tolerable level. Or the tension may come in waves up and down until the crisis is resolved and the anxiety dissipated. Either mode is emotionally painful for the person going through the crisis and needs swift, skillful intervention from a professional to disarm the crisis as quickly as possible and return the person to a more comfortable functioning level. While the crisis is painful and threatening, however, it is also an opportunity. It is paradoxical but true. A crisis provides potential for growth and change, which can be of tremendous benefit to a person's life. As we know from the work of Erik Erikson, growth requires crisis at every developmental stage in life. If the crisis is met and successfully resolved, the personal gains from the experience can far outweigh the immediate pain and discomfort. A crisis, more often than not, is usually superimposed on a hotbed of chronic problems that have been complicating and frustrating a person's life. The crisis brings these old problems to the surface where they can be dealt with at long last and finally resolved. Maladaptive problem-solving techniques can be replaced with more effective ones, and an individual can move from his relative isolation towards more satisfying living. This movement is hastened and enhanced if during his crisis a helping relationship is made available to him. Yet, even though the worker is expected to move through the helping process at top speed, she is also expected to maintain a professional attitude towards her client, the work at hand, and the helping process. The worker must be doubly careful not to be overwhelmed by the crisis situation or the client's distress. Over-identification with the problem will only serve to exacerbate the client's difficulty and block the way to problem solving. The first goal in crisis intervention is to stabilize the situation. This may simply mean to help the client to calm down, or it may mean finding alternate housing or medical treatment immediately for a family in trouble. The worker will have to act fast, but she cannot move so quickly that she forgets to involve the client in her efforts. A client feeling overwhelmed by a crisis and in some serious jeopardy will understandably be somewhat immobilized by it all. The worker needs, nonetheless, to involve the client as fully as possible in A. Assessing the dimensions of the crisis, and B. Developing resolution strategies. As always, the worker wants to work with a client, not do things for him. The worker will have to determine the state of the client's inner equilibrium in order to evaluate how much active participation she can realistically expect from him in the crisis solving. The best way to find out is simply to ask. A client who cannot mobilize himself at that moment will let you know. Likewise, a client who wants and is able to participate will do so. During a crisis intervention, the worker knows that her client is at risk and that she may need to let him lean on her and borrow her strength during this stressful period. She is there to be his advocate and ally throughout the crisis and will move with him towards their problem-solving goals in harmony with his needs and capabilities. The worker needs to make herself available to her client during the crisis as fully as possible. This may well mean extending herself beyond normal working hours. This is a consideration that must be borne in mind. Continuity of communication between worker and client during a crisis time is of crucial importance to the speedy resolution of the problem. Handling a crisis effectively comes with experience, of course. Yet, even a young worker will not be thrown during her efforts at crisis intervention if she has mastered, at least at a beginning level, the fundamental interviewing tools and has developed the solid self on which to rely in helping. Study session summary. In this study session, you learned that crisis intervention telescopes the interviewing process and demands the rapid-fire use of a worker's helping tools and skills. Without delay, there is a sense of urgency and immediacy added to the helping relationship. There is no time to waste. End of study session 9. Thank you for listening.